I think here it's not really necessarily about, is it healthy? Could it benefit people? I think a lot of people's stigma is it legal or not?
Welcome to the Nashville Current Podcast. I am your host, Ed Clay, and today we have two special guests, Mike Soloman from Holistic Connection and Craft Cannabis, and Joe Fuson from Hemp Law Group. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good.
So we've talked before. I think, Joe, you and I have done 2 podcasts together. And Mike, we've done 1 podcast together. So what's been going on since the last one with the weed world in Tennessee?
Yeah, well, the weed world in Tennessee has been good. Mike's and his stores are doing really well. I've been handling a lot of cases and helping people out that have had issues in the compliance stuff. But mostly, what I tend to do is assist people that are trying to get in this business to form their businesses and form their company. And had a lot of people reaching out lately. It's been a very, very good industry, as Mike can tell you.
Yeah, and the good thing that you're kind of starting off with kind of the thing that we want to talk about with you saying weed business. Obviously, with me being in Tennessee, I'm in the cannabis industry, right? And I field phone calls all the time and spend most of my days explaining this topic, and I always throwing out funny analogies and different things. But, the word cannabis, if you look at it, it's kind of like the word coffee, right? And hemp is decaf and marijuana is caffeinated, right? But they're both coffee, right? So that's how it is. So we're in the cannabis industry. So we look at, we're in the coffee industry. We're going ahead, we're making the best decaf cup of coffee around, and we're opening up the coffee shops, and that's what we're doing.
Awesome.
So, but it's hemp, it's decaf cannabis.
Since we talked, actually, I don't remember how many stores that you had, but you have a group of stores and a specific brand of, it's not cannabis. What is the Delta 8? Explain that.
Yeah, so how that works. Well, one of the misconceptions, like what people don't understand is, obviously marijuana is illegal and any marijuana derived product. And after I speak, obviously Joey's, really good at answering these questions as well. But THC is legal. Okay, Delta 9 THC is legal. THCA is legal. Delta 8 THC is legal. And the thing is, they're regulated different. They're both in marijuana. They're both in hemp because they're in all cannabis, right? But when you grow marijuana and you derive it from marijuana, it's obviously regulated different. It's not federally legal. You're following some state program in either Colorado or California, and you're only regulated to your state. So the same THC, you can pull it out of hemp, derive it out of hemp, and it is federally legal. And it's regulated completely different. So Joey can speak on that a lot.
Yeah. Passing the mic back. Yeah, so that's exactly right. I mean, anything hemp derived. I mean, the federal government back in 2018, the Farm Bill came out and in essence made cannabis, it made cannabis legal so long as the cannabis had less than 0.3% THC. And so, in essence, any cannabis that has less than 0.3% THC, or hemp, that's what we call it, is legal. And that's across the entire country. And you've got states like Tennessee that have a thriving hemp industry based on this decaf, if you will, cannabis, cannabis without THC. And there are a lot of states, as we know now, over 30 states across the country that have legal cannabis programs that allow a lot more THC. And some of them are medically available to them, and some of them are recreation available to them. And those products, marijuana, most of those products have 25% THC, 30% THC. Some of the concentrates, as Mike knows, he used to work out there in California, but have 90% THC. In Tennessee, it's a less than 0.3% is all you're allowed to have, and that doesn't involve Delta 8. Delta 8's not included in that, so just Delta 9.
Correct. And to answer exactly your question, what is Delta 8? Though Delta 8 is it's an isomer of Delta 9, which is a derivative with a different molecular bonding going on. So that's why some states have outlawed it, because they argue that it's synthetic, which it's not. You're pulling it from natural properties, from hemp oil, hemp extract. But there is a different bonding that's going on a scientific level that makes it different than Delta-9.
I see, but in Tennessee, it's legal.
In Tennessee, they're all legal. Delta-9's legal, THCA's legal, Delta-8. Just Delta-9 is regulated to 0.3%, like Joey's talking about.
Okay, got it. Where are we at right now with legislation for legalization of decaf and caffeinated cannabis?
Yeah, in Tennessee, we're nowhere. So, I always joke every year, every 18 months, I get a whole flood of, there's a next bill. It's all for nothing. I mean, Tennessee right now, as long as I believe Governor Lee is sitting in office, we're not going to have any advancements in Tennessee that allow for it to be recreationally, for sure. And maybe if there's medical, it would be very highly regulated. But as far as the national level, huge news. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I think Chuck Schumer has introduced a bill to remove marijuana from the controlled substance list, which is, and it sounds like there's a huge support for it.
That's exciting. I mean, I think that's something that could pass right now at the federal level.
Yeah.
Usually when marijuana goes legal in a state, it's under a state-run program. And they usually try to pass a medical version of it first. Rarely do they do like Colorado and they go straight into recreational. And even if they do, they're mocking those programs off of states that started, with a medical thing first. So it's usually regulated by a milligram level and a serving size. So that's why when you get an edible in Colorado or California and it's, 100 milligrams, it'll be 10 milligrams per serving. It'll have the little perforated places for you to break them and cut it, because it's regulated by a milligram and a serving size. And that's because it's not federally legal. It's following that state program. That's what the state program says. Hemp-derived THC, it is federally legal. So it's regulated more like alcohol, right? So a beer, right? If you're drinking a 12-ounce, 5% alcohol Bud Light, right? And Bud Light wants to legally get you more alcohol, they can't up the percentage of the alcohol in the beer, but what do? They sell you a 24-ounce or a 40-ounce, right? They sell you a bigger beer, right? So you can do that. We can make great products here in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee has great hemp laws that allow you to make great products, and that's why the industry's done so well here. But yeah, these are legitimate, THC products, focused on the THC side of it, 100% hemp derived. But yeah.
I also just point out back to the Delta-8, because that's kind of become a hot subject, is, there's none of that regulation for Delta-8. So you could have arguably as much Delta-8 inside a product as you want. Now it converts, and I'm not the scientist, but it converts at about 50% when you consume it. So it's about half as strong as your regular Delta-9. But it's not, and that's why the states that are outlawing it, that are banning it, are mostly, when you look across the board, the states that have cannabis programs. They came out quickly. The only state that's embraced it has been Florida, that actually put some regulations in, and in essence did what I think, and I've recommended the TGC and different organizations here, that we should do if they're going to do anything, is just regulate it the same as you would regulate Delta-9, and have some kind of, like Mike said, a percentage that you would operate under. Because there's a lot of cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. There's over 115 or so cannabinoids that are identified, and those are just 3 of them. So they're continuing to find more and more as they research this plant. Delta-10's become something you're going to hear from. It's just really expensive and I think hard to extract, but yeah, it has different effects on people. It's more of a caffeine-based feeling. It's kind of more of an alert type thing that helps people with focus and certain things like that.
And how many locations do you have right now in Nashville, Mike?
We have 10 locations all over Middle Tennessee. They all give you a recreational experience. You go in there and we have 100% hemp-derived, THC formulated products, right? All of them, with test results on site. All of our test results are on our website. But yeah, You go there, you can have an in-store experience. We have bud tenders on site. You can do dabs. We have a dab bar.
What is a dab?
A dab is like fresh squeezed cannabis, right? So you squeeze the cannabis, you get the extract, and you are consuming it without any plant matter. So it's very healthy, and then also works very well.
It's very strong.
Yes.
I see. Is it like a come out to be like a rock type thing?
No, it comes out into an oil, just like hemp oil. It's the same concept. There's different ways of extracting. You can do it by CO2, you can do it by ethanol, or you can do what they call solventless, which is just naturally extracting it by using basically a hot press.
I see.
But by heat and pressure.
I forget. I've done a dab, but it was like it was in California, and but it was so strong.
Yeah.
It reminded me of like the crack of weed.
Oh gosh.
I haven't done crack, by the way, but I was like, oh, I'm good. Like,
yeah, well, because that was derived from marijuana. So even though it is the same THC, it's the same Delta 9 that we're talking about. And if you talk about Delta 8, it's a derivative of that. But that was so concentrated. What you took was probably, anywhere from 60 to 85% THC.
okay.
Which, obviously is going to have, an extreme psychoactive effect.
Yeah, it sure did. It was like probably 10 years ago. I think I'm still feeling the effects.
Yeah, and that's the thing is there's so many benefits generally from consuming cannabis. You're just removing that psychoactive, and you can imagine, in essence, it's the same concept. You just take away that 85% of THC that, But now, with Delta 8, you're able to, return some psychoactive effect to it.
No, I've heard a lot of really good things about Delta 8. My friends, they'll take it. They're like, oh, this is actually really good. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that a product that is legal before weed still works.
Yeah. Well, and they let you, like we said, it's what's crazy is that all the properties and cannabinoids that are in that you love about marijuana are all in hemp. So we can legally grow those here in the state. We can legally extract those, and we can legally formulate products with those cannabinoids in them. They just have to be at certain ratios and certain percentages where they're legal.
Sure.
Right. So it's just knowing how to formulate those where they're still legal, but they still give the customer the quality and the effect that they want.
Now, how did you get into owning the stores and just the cannabis business in general?
Went out to California and grew out there for a pretty well-known dispensary called the Green Goddess. They have one on Malibu and one in Venice. And I grew back in the medical days. I had 30 of their patients and grew 18 plants per patient. But then moved back here and it just kind of applied the same thing here. Went ahead and built a medical marijuana grade type growing facility. We're growing hemp in there, decaf cannabis as we like to call it. And then, started owning the stores and making the products. And really it was just a lot of trial and error, a lot of research. Spent a lot of money in testing, hundreds of thousands of dollars in testing to get exact milligram levels right and all this. And through all this testing and research with some universities, we, kind of accidentally figured out how to make legal hemp-derived recreational products, So that's what's been the cool thing about it. So you just, took us a while talking with legal and, hey, just, hemp products can be 0.3% THC. Well, can we advertise that 0.3%? Can we promote that 0.3%? Can we be proud of that 0.3%, right? Mm-hmm. Because, 0.3% can equal a decent amount of milligrams if you know how to formulate them correctly.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems like, where we're at in Tennessee, you're talking about growing in California. How many plants?
I could grow 18 plants per patient, and I had 30 patients, so It's like 540 something plants or something as well.
Yeah. So I guess back in the day, that was in California, right? So that was when it was just medical legal. It wasn't recreational. Wasn't legal.
Correct.
And so, what year was that?
Oh, that would have been 2012, 2011 and 12, something like that.
So 9 years ago, 10 years ago, you were out in California, growing these medical plants for people and giving people that needed it, for legitimate medical uses, an option to opiates, an option instead of, Valium, an option instead of pharmaceutical drugs that are highly addictive. And here we are 9 years later, 10 years later, in Tennessee. Medical isn't even legal. What do you think, what do you think is causing that overall? And how long before they figure out to legalize it?
Yeah, I mean, we do have actually some version of that here in Tennessee. It goes back to children that have epilepsy and seizures. We can actually have some cannabis oil that exceeds the 0.3%. I think it's now up to 0.9%. Still not even close to anything that you see in most states. It's going to be at the conclusion of Governor Lee, I believe. It's going to take that. It's going to take this current regime, I think, to move on, if that ever happens. But it's going to take that. It's also going to take the federal government doing what they're pushing to do right now. Once that happens, it's going to take the crutch away from a lot of these legislators you talk to and say, yeah, we hear people say they want it. We hear people say they get a huge benefit from it. We hear people say it's a replacement for really harmful and addictive narcotics. But it's federally illegal, so what are we going to do? Hands are
That's
tied.
such a cop out.
It's what you hear often. And I've talked to several. And
That's like the go-to talking point.
And it's better than the old ones that aren't accurate. The gateway drug argument and the DUI argument and things like that. So there's.
Yeah, I mean it is better, and so I guess we're making progress in that aspect. But overall, 10, 11 years ago, 9 years ago, however long, you were growing medical plants for people in California. And now here we are in Tennessee, and it's just so taboo.
Oh yeah, and I think Joey's right. I think and we've actually heard state representatives and different people say it. If it becomes federally legal, if it gets off the list that they always talk about, then the Schedule 1 list, isn't that what they say, Joe? Yeah. If it gets off the Schedule 1 list, then they'll consider this and consider that. And if you notice, honestly, the same. I think they're right. The same thing happened with gambling, right? In Tennessee, we're from the South, and we're religious. I'm a religious person. Everybody was so no on gambling. Well, 2 years ago in July, Trump tweeted one morning, "Hey, the federal government is no longer regulating gambling. States figure it out." And now we already have online gambling in Tennessee. So I think it just shows you that, I think here it's not really necessarily about, is it healthy? Could it benefit people? I think a lot of people's stigma is it legal or not? Period. Is it legal or not? And that's why we're proud of the products we make, because, we can do all those things and give you a legal product that you can consume right here in the state of Tennessee.
Yeah.
So.
Thankful for you. I mean, the worst, what bothers me about the whole thing is that, we could be also going to your place when it becomes legal. I know that you'll be leading that charge and a major part of that. But going to your place and not having to make a shady phone call or, put yourself in a situation where I'm going to throw it out, and this isn't for everybody, but this is some people. Actually, I've been in situations like this in my life. How about that? Where you could get robbed, you might be in a bad neighborhood, you might have to go somewhere you don't know what the person did. All of these things that happen when you're having to buy weed illegally on the street. So I just think that, the insanity, even hearing the argument that, oh, it's not legal federally yet. I mean, come on. They've got to grow a set, like give me a break.
Yeah, no, you see, I'm mostly what I do on a weekly basis. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so I'm defending people. We can take it the next step. I mean, people not only can't use the product here; it's not available to them. No, not only that, they are getting charged with possessing the product. Mm-hmm. Right? They're getting charged and convicted of crimes that put them on probation. We had in our podcast last time, we went through this whole thing about this, about how that starts the effects and the kind of the steamrolling effect of once you get on probation and are in a position in life to to be able to comply with that, how that can ultimately be your demise. And most of the people in jail, you'll ask them, what are they in jail for? They'll tell you the crime ultimately they were convicted of, but they're not in jail usually because they were convicted of a crime. They're mostly in jail for violating the probation. They go on probation thinking everything's fine. It's easy to pay money every month, and we spend the we've talked about this. It's just it's a really bad cycle you get into. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I hear in criminal court a lot is that the DAs and the district attorneys will tell me that, and the officers and the detectives, when you say, look, it's only pot, it's only marijuana, let's be easy on this guy, and they'll push back and say, oh, can't tell you how many shootings I've gone to, or how many shootings I had, or murder cases I've had to prosecute, or aggravated assault because it was a marijuana deal. Well, that's to your point.
Right.
Let's get rid of those marijuana deals in a back alley, or not even that. That's almost stigma. In the parking lot of a Kroger, that's where it happens. It doesn't happen in some shady alleys. People just meet out and they shoot people right in front of, right in the public. And it's usually young kids that don't handle guns often. And I represented a boy that was involved in a case on a marijuana deal that, the kid I think just accidentally pulled the trigger. There's one shot. And if we legalized it, we could have people going to shops like Mike's shops and the Holistic Connection and buying it from a bud tender that will tell them exactly what kind they would benefit from, because not everybody wants to come in there and get high. That's not what everybody wants out of it. In fact, a lot of people, to your point about D8, that's the reason they like that, is it doesn't get them that high. It's actually a very mild effect, and it gives them all the other benefits that cannabis can give you,
Yeah, it's just wild to me in 2021 that we have, that we are here, and as you're saying, you had a kid that shot somebody. People are being put in situations that they don't want to be in for a medication that we know helps people. It does. I truly believe marijuana does a lot more good than bad. Does it do some bad? Sure. There's a lot of things that does some things bad, but overwhelmingly, I do think it's a very good thing.
Well, and what Joe's saying too, like what it is the way we have it set up, the exposure is completely wrong, right? If you're 22 or 24 years old and you want to try cannabis for the first time, right? If you're in California or Colorado, you can go to a nice dispensary, walk in there, buy marijuana or hemp, and then go home and try it. And no one offered you, any other drugs at that facility. There was probably an off-duty police officer as the doorman, at that facility. And so that's the experience that you get if you want to try it in a legal state. So if you're in Tennessee and you're 22 or 24 and you want to try cannabis, you have to call a drug dealer. And then now you're probably going to be exposed to other things. So it's the fact of, if you made gummy bears illegal, then when someone was looking for gummy bears, they'd have to find it on the black market and they would get exposed to all these other things. So the fact that marijuana is illegal is why it's been labeled a gateway drug or whatever, however they want to approach that. That's what I've always said is I've never been offered any other drug in a cannabis dispensary in California or Colorado, but cannabis, The
idea that it's a gateway drug, it's interesting to see how righteous people will get too, because, they'll it's a gateway, and they'll come up with one example of, I'm like, sure. Mm-hmm. But overall, how many times has it put a good kid in a situation he shouldn't have been in, being introduced to other drugs? That's the gateway really is the deal. Exactly. the experience of the person buying the illegal weed from the drug dealer, and that drug dealer possibly having more stuff, possibly being with some people that the kid shouldn't be around. And so I think that's to me it's common sense. Now, does that make every situation like that where someone's calling somebody for weed like a potentially gateway? No, but for sure the gateway is the introduction to the drug dealer.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard, I read this somewhere. It was, we know what a gateway drug is trauma, is neglect, is abuse. I mean, those are the things that usually lead people to use something that gives them a high, that gives them some relief or some, maybe a change of a mental state, relieves some anxiety, helps them sleep, people. And I think that, it goes to the point I've always, do you have a right to get high? I mean, does somebody have a right to sit down and recreationally in their own home get high? You have the right to go take a bottle of scotch and sit there and drink yourself into a stupor. Apparently, you can do that in your own home. So where do we lose track of the right of somebody to get released? It doesn't have to just be medicinal. I know that's the one thing that frustrates a lot of people is the fact that you have people that are deprived of something that could help them health-wise. But just what about the right to just be able to get stoned at your house?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can speak from my own personal experience. I'm not a big weed smoker. Occasionally smoke weed. My business partners absolutely smoke, and they don't. I like to have a couple glasses of wine at night. They don't really drink at all, and so it's like they're choosing one thing, I'm choosing another. But it's hard to say that one is wrong and one is right. And then if you go back into the history and you really look at what the propaganda was with the reefer madness, and with what got us to this point. Mm-hmm. And they wonder why people don't really trust the government right now. Just look at history. What's happened over the last 100 years since 1921? We had the Great Depression, World War II. Multiple experiments, the Tuskegee Project, all these lies, reefer madness, all these projects within the government, the federal government, that were experimenting on humans. And we get to a point in 2021 where we're sitting here like we know all of this is bullshit. The whole system that told us this reefer madness, that if we smoke weed, we're going to be jumping out of windows, and created these crazy laws that were really licenses for the government to be violent to people that were choosing something to smoke. Yeah,
look at Nixon. When you read Anslinger's report and you read some of the stuff about why they came out with the Controlled Substance Act, and why they created a list and put these drugs up on these lists that codified their ability to really prosecute people heavily for drugs, and how cannabis got on that list and how it got so high on that list.
What were the reasons?
Yeah, one of the reasons was I think if you start with Nixon, and you think about that versus when you talk about back post Prohibition, and that whole regime, when that first started back post Prohibition, it was all of a sudden alcohol had become legal, and they had created an organization that was designed to prosecute alcohol cases, and all of a sudden they had no targets. There was no, and so they turned their attention to the areas where the immigrants, the immigrants and the jazz singers is what you read in some reports, and the Hispanics and the blacks, and they really prosecuted those back then. Well, weirdly enough, you fast forward 50 years to the 70s. And Nixon's is just a regurgitation of that same concept. So in 50 years, we learned nothing. And then in 71, that's when it really turned up. Most people who, my parents were maybe teenagers, people didn't really get prosecuted for marijuana. It wasn't, I don't think it was even really illegal or prosecuted prior to the 70s. And all of a sudden, 71, it became, really, really big. And then when it became a controlled substance. So, yeah, and those reasons have traditionally been racial, and really derived towards controlling certain populations.
Yeah, and you look at all the people that have been in prison since, all the lives that have really been destroyed since. And, people forget. How easy is it to forget, what the last, like previous to the last 10 years, but what the previous 50 years before were for people that smoked weed, or people in maybe some communities that didn't have the money for attorneys, or, like life shattered, sometimes life in prison for marijuana. And so that's why when I see in 2021, we're here today, it's offensive. It's offensive when politicians, I understand it's better that they said, oh, it's not a gateway drug or this or that, but we're just waiting for it to be. It's still a cop-out.
Well, the fact that, and Joe knows the more exact laws, but the fact that it's a Schedule I means it has federal mandatories attached to it. And that's what's crazy, is that people can get arrested for certain amounts of cannabis and there's no argument. There's federal mandatories, and people got to go to jail for a long amount of time. Joe can talk about that, but that's where it really gets me, and what you're talking about, where it really wrecks lives, is when you'll have someone, probably, whatever they did, and has a federal mandatory type of sentencing.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that we've got a place in Davidson County here where the district attorney has just chosen. This is, to your point, Ed. He just chose to disregard the state law. He said, "Look, I know the state law exists, but we're not going to enforce it here in our county. Mm-hmm. So if you bring it to my office to prosecute, I've got discretion, and I'm going to use it." And good for him.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn Funk did a great thing, I think, in Davidson County. Now, you'll get ridicule when you go to other counties that say, well, he's just not following the law. No, I think he's doing exactly what he should do as a district attorney, is use discretion and decide what his office is going to waste resources on, and what we're going to put in our probation departments that we spend money that Metro gets taxed for. I think he's doing a good thing. I wish more district attorneys would do that, and maybe we'd see a breakdown.
When you're talking about using discretion, thank God on the state level, city level, they can use discretion. Federal, as you were saying, you had the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines, which actually we got good reform under the Trump administration. I'm not sure what the specific drops in sentencing were, but explain the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines and how that works at the federal level.
Yeah, and I don't practice tons of federal work, but I do know enough to maybe be dangerous when it comes to federal mandatory sentencing. You've got to generally they're not prosecuting minor marijuana cases at the federal level anymore, generally, which is good. And that's kind of been an over time change. But when people still have large amounts, or you've got other conspiracies and other organizations that they believe are using marijuana for some other bigger purpose, they will still prosecute them. But yeah, the federal mandatory minimums are cases where you have somebody with a certain offense range that in essence, when you have a charge in federal court, it's a chart, and it's got on one side like a point system, and there's a whole lot of factors that go into how many points, and some of them based on your criminal history and the charge and whether you cooperated, whether you entered a plea, and you get points taken away and added. And then once that point system comes into place, and then you match it up with some other factors, the court, in essence, is forced to sentence you at a certain range. And it used to be that it was no discretion, right? It used to be that the federal sentencing guidelines controlled. Well, they changed that, luckily, not too long ago, where it now gives the court some discretion to operate within that framework. But then there's federal mandatory minimums. So the mandatory sentencing in the federal mandatory minimums, it says if you get convicted of this offense, it's no less than X.
Right.
And it's one of you should get Kevin Sharp in here. Talk about somebody that'd be fascinating to talk to. Kevin Sharp is a local lawyer here who was a federal judge, lifetime appointment, and he decided to step away because he couldn't do it anymore. He wasn't willing to put more young people in prison for the rest of their life over drug charges.
Wow.
Now, these weren't cannabis charges, most of them, but they're drug charges. And he has a story where one of the guys he put away for the rest of his life, he came back and worked to help get out of prison.
Wow.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah,
He'd be a great person to have on.
It's unbelievable when you think about it. Even, the reforms that we need in this country, in this state, that are kind of common sense. Like the idea that a judge can't judge, doesn't have discretion to say, well, this is what, you can't be sentenced anything less than this because it's what the law says. You know, that's crazy to me. Especially as we're moving into, well, in a way though, we're moving into an apparatus that has more control over the people. And, you know, then our drug laws are getting a little more liberal, thankfully. But, so it's almost like the balance is shifting, and maybe they're worried about the people having somewhat of an awakening, you know, because the cannabis does not, you know, it's not causing people to be violent or, you know, do, like violent crimes, anything like that. If anything, you're like, no, man, I'm good. You know, you don't want to fight. You don't want to do those things. So I would think that it's just a weird time, because the idea in 2021 that we're still not at that point, you know, and you have a way to still offer a product that's good, but you're not able to offer the product that you want in the end.
Yeah, well, the great thing about it, I think we kind of maybe started off thinking like that. But yeah, I mean, the products that we make, 100%, you know, hemp derived, you know, THC products, full spectrum, have a lot of cannabinoids in there. I think what we've learned now through the research we've done and all the product making that we've done is that, you know, this is kind of the product we want. So we follow, even though marijuana laws aren't here yet, I've operated in a legal state. So like take our brownie, for example, you know, we already, it's under 10 milligrams per serving, because we know that's the law. It's at 8 milligrams per serving. And it also is under, you know, 0.3% total THC. So it fits both regulations. So if marijuana went legal tomorrow, I wouldn't change my formulation too much. I would be making kind of the same product. So that's the cool thing about it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people want marijuana derived products. But I think that's the thing that Joey and you know, through his legal side and me just through the business side, that's kind of what we're doing, is kind of educating the community on, you don't have to wait on marijuana to get a legal THC product. And you don't have to wait on marijuana to get a recreational effect. You know, the psychoactiveness of THC is different for everybody. Somebody can puff on, you know, can eat a brownie or puff on a joint the whole time, and somebody takes one little bite or one little puff, and it affects them. So the psychoactiveness, how it affects someone, is all with that person. You just got to make sure to make a legal product, and put serving size recommendations and hope people follow them.
Now, didn't a couple years ago, I don't remember how many years, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, didn't somebody in Rutherford County get busted up for selling legal weed products? I think it was Rutherford County.
Yeah, you know about Operation Candy Crush?
Was that what? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it was several years ago now, and I know some of the lawyers that have been pursuing, because what happened was after that went afoul, they ended up filing lawsuits. The stores got together and they filed multiple lawsuits against not only the TBI, but also the local district attorney's office and individual district attorneys that are still involved in some litigation. They settled out of court. Some of the people settled out of court not long ago, and it made some publicity. But yeah, that was back when people were really uneducated.
Right.
And that was, I think, a turning point, because what it caused was a conversation that people said, well, what are they doing wrong? And they were doing nothing wrong. Every product they had was hemp derived. Now, it was in packaging that looked very similar to the Colorado products, because a lot of the people that were manufacturing at the time were getting their, you know, they were sending products out here, but they were legal products. They were all hemp derived. And most of the products actually had no THC in it. Most of those products they seized were isolates. They had just zero THC, just had CBD in them. They just looked like the fun magical type gummies.
Right.
Well, what happened was that they ran a sting, and they came and padlocked the front doors of all these legal businesses and took all their product and put them on the front page of the paper and put them on the news. And when one of the officers, which you can go on YouTube now and look at it, somebody said, well, these are legal products. He goes, I don't believe so, and he's on the front kind of mocking the whole idea that these are legal. And it was, eggs in his face because, they were all legal products, and they had to return all the products, and then they all got promptly sued in federal court.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think it's just not knowing the laws. I mean, if you pass by one of my stores, you're going to see a sign that says, come inside and get legal THC. Well, I mean, if you go, oh my God, THC is not legal, you can only get THC from marijuana, well, you don't understand, and so the fact that, no, we have THC, it is hemp derived, so it is 100% legal. We can actually put this in the mail. It's federally legal. We can cross state lines with it. This is actually more legal than any marijuana product. But that being said, it's definitely, if you didn't know and you see words like cannabis and you see words like THC and you automatically assume that something illegal is going on, then you don't know the laws and you don't know the science.
Yeah, and you've been really kind of educating people. I guess part of what you do, and having 10 stores, is educating people on the difference, right?
Oh, 100%. Myself personally, I field 20 to 50 phone calls a day. Hey, how are you doing this? How is this legal? People want to know, and I want to explain it to them. One of the things that I attribute to how far we've gotten is our transparency. We do tours with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. We've done tours with sheriff's divisions. Off-duty sheriffs have came in and done tours, and to customers, to potential retail customers, wholesale customers. So it's just educating everybody. And then once you do, they get excited because they're like, oh my gosh, this is a legal product, and you've tested this, and you've tested it 5 different times and through every stage of production, and it's never left your chain of custody, and just all these good, quality control, all these good things. But yeah, cannabis is completely legal in Tennessee. It's just in the hemp form. And THC is completely legal in Tennessee. It's just in the hemp form.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and the education that we're dealing with too. I mean, we're still educating judges and district attorneys, and I've spent time with banks. I've spent time with advertising agencies, people that want to learn before they do something that could affect the FCC compliance of their network.
Right.
You can imagine their concerns, so they want to cross. And I get it. I mean, I understand where they're coming from, and I've sat down with several of them and explained to them. And I've even had somebody recently call me from an organization saying, "What is Delta 8? I need to know." And I spend 20 minutes on the phone, and they're like, "Thanks." And they just want information, which is new. I mean, I think 5 years ago, nobody wanted to hear it. Oh, it's all weed, right? I don't know what you're talking about. And now people are wanting to know so they can put Mike's companies on billboards and let people advertise and say the word THC on the radio, right? Is that legal to do? Well, yeah, it's legal to do. Why would it not be legal? These products are legal. And they're like, well, yeah, but we're not going to do something that we're concerned that could affect our other, have a big financial impact on us with the FCC. So I get it. Yeah. And I mean, even with the banks, when they were trying to regulate it, this was a couple of years ago, they came to me and said, we operate in a world of regulations. There are no regulations on this stuff. How do we create regulations of our own so we can actually just check boxes? Right. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic because I guess because it is a Schedule 1. The banks would be afraid of messing with caffeinated cannabis, and what you're dealing with is something completely legal that's different, and they should just let you right in.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill was the savior there. I mean, it is a federal act that's in the books that says anything derived from a cannabis plant with less than 0.3% THC is legal in any form. And the DEA's tried to throw they've tried to interpret that differently, and that's been stalled out. At the end of 2019, the DEA came out and had some questions about Delta 8 because of what Mike said earlier, not being quote unquote naturally occurring, because you have to add that catalyst or you have to add an ingredient. I'm not the scientist here, but there's something you have to add to it to make it. And so they said, we don't think that's legal. And that was part of the DEA's interpretation, that since that interpretation, there hasn't been anything that's happened since then. COVID hit not long after that, and I haven't heard anything about it since, but we could hear some more about it from them sometime soon.
All right. So if someone wants to come out and visit one of your locations, where should they go?
Yeah, we have our flagship location is at 2407 8th Avenue South. We have Dab Bar on site, bud tenders there, so we have an awesome in-store experience where you can experience these products that we're talking about, 100% legal, hemp-derived, THC products. So yeah, it's a really cool thing. Great atmosphere. You should come sometime.
I would love to.
Yes.
I'd love to come out and check it out. And Joe, if someone wanted to contact you about, some legal advice,
Yeah,
where they
absolutely.
go?
Yeah, you don't want to have to contact me if you get in trouble. But so if it's something that, if you need to contact me, you can just reach me at my office here in Nashville, and you can get me at freemanfuson.com or Joe at freemanfuson.com.
Well, Joe and Mike, thanks for coming on again. We love having you on here and talking about these issues. I think they're important issues. I hope that one day we can actually come and celebrate cannabis being legal in Tennessee. I know it doesn't completely change your business model, but I think it's a win for society. I think we would all really want that. And, keep fighting the good fight.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.